I never imagined my own son, a respected doctor, would stare me right in the eyes as I lay bleeding on a hospital stretcher and say with utter indifference, "I would rather die than save a failure like you." Those were the precise words that escaped from Robert's lips when the medical team requested his blood donation to preserve my life. What he remained unaware of was the concealed camera capturing every moment of his disloyalty. Before we proceed, subscribe and activate the notification bell as we share fresh tales daily. Give a thumbs up and share in the comments which city and nation you're tuning in from. My name is Norman Anderson. I am 65 years old, and for my whole existence, I trusted that I had nurtured my son properly. I constructed a property business from scratch, laboring 16-hour shifts for 35 years to provide Robert with all I lacked in my youth. I covered the costs for elite private academies in New York, a medical qualification from a premier college, and I even presented him with his initial medical practice upon completion. I assumed I had fostered a principled individual, a physician who grasped the importance of preserving lives. How mistaken I was. Everything began on Monday, September 15th, 2024 at 4:00 in the early hours. I had experienced odd sensations for multiple days, with stomach aches I first attributed to my advancing years. That evening, the discomfort grew intolerable, and I began coughing up blood. My neighbor, Mark Thompson, discovered me unconscious in the corridor of my upscale apartment complex and promptly summoned emergency services at Metropolitan General Hospital. Dr. William Hartley outlined the gravity of my condition. I suffered from extensive internal hemorrhage due to burst esophageal varices, an issue I was previously oblivious to. My blood pressure had plummeted alarmingly, and I required an instant transfusion of type AB positive blood. The challenge was that the facility's blood supply held scarce stocks of my rare blood group, and my state was dire. "Mr. Anderson," Dr. Hartley informed me solemnly, "we must swiftly reach out to matching family members. Your blood type is uncommon, and every second is vital." Nurse Maria Gonzalez had already reached Robert, who reached the hospital precisely at 6:30 in the morning. When I spotted my son entering the emergency area, a wave of indescribable relief washed over me. Robert was 45 years old, a heart specialist at a prominent medical center, and he was fully aware we shared the identical blood type, having contributed for me previously during a routine procedure. I believed my ordeal had concluded. "Doctor." Hartley neared Robert and swiftly detailed the crisis. "Dr. Anderson, your father demands an emergency transfusion. Records indicate you match his blood type. Would you contribute 500 milliliters? It is a question of survival." What ensued forever altered my perception of my son. Robert gazed at me with a look I had never witnessed on him. It lacked worry. It lacked affection. It was far chillier and more scheming. He stayed quiet for numerous seconds that stretched like forever. "Dr. Anderson." "Doctor," Hartley pressed. "We require your response without delay." Robert inhaled deeply and uttered the phrases that would etch themselves into my soul eternally. "I am not giving even a single drop of my blood to rescue this disappointment. I would rather die than save a failure like you, Dad." The hush in the emergency ward was absolute. Nurse Maria's mouth fell open. "Doctor." Hartley struggled to process what he had heard. It felt as though a blade had pierced my heart. The bodily agony from the bleeding paled against the heartache from those words from my own child. "But Doctor, Hartley stuttered. "He is your father. He is fading." "Precisely." Robert responded with a harsh grin I shall never erase. "And the quicker he passes, the better for all, particularly me." Following Robert's crushing statement, the physicians had to rapidly seek alternative solutions to sustain my life. Thankfully, they identified a suitable donor at an adjacent medical facility, and the transfusion succeeded. Yet the sentimental harm was irreversible. My own offspring had opted to witness my demise instead of extending aid. Over the subsequent 4 days, I stayed in the hospital. I chose to simulate that my health was graver than reality. The medics had steadied me, but I mimicked disorientation, profound fatigue, and challenges in articulate speech. I aimed to watch my relatives' conduct when they assumed I teetered on death's edge or, worse, forfeiting my sanity. On Thursday evening, while feigning slumber in my hospital cot, I eavesdropped on a dialogue between Robert and his spouse Stacy that sent shivers through me. They had crept into my chamber, convinced I was insensible from the drugs. "Are you certain he cannot hear us?" Stacy murmured anxiously, peeking at my bed. "Absolutely," Robert responded with utter detachment. "The physicians mentioned he is enduring bouts of intense bewilderment. Moreover, they are administering potent tranquilizers. He will grasp nothing." What I overheard next demonstrated that my son's ruthlessness knew no bounds. Stacy started discussing their schemes for my destiny, as if I were an encumbrance they must eliminate swiftly. "Robert, we cannot delay further," Stacy stated in a plotting tone. "You must hasten the procedure to place him in the Oakwood nursing home. The more we postpone, the higher the chance he could fully mend, and we might forfeit our opportunity." "I have already conversed with the facility's manager," my son answered. "They can accommodate him by next Tuesday. Once there, it will be simpler to demonstrate he is unfit to oversee his matters." Stacy drew nearer to the bed where I rested still, regulating my respiration to appear utterly unaware of their exchange. "And regarding the assets," she inquired softly. "The condominium complex in the city center, the residence in California, and particularly the primary savings account. Per the attorney, he holds nearly $750,000 in liquid funds, excluding the portfolios. All is arranged," Robert responded with an assurance that horrified me. "Once he is in the nursing home, we will submit the health records I compiled with my associate, Dr. Ramirez. We will attest that he endures progressed senile dementia and cannot handle his fiscal choices. I will be designated his lawful custodian automatically." "Are you totally confident it will succeed?" Stacy pressed. "We cannot tolerate any errors. If it emerges that he is entirely coherent—" "Do not fret," Robert cut her off. "I possess 25 years of healthcare expertise. I understand precisely how to compose an indisputable report. Additionally, I have consulted with Counsel Patterson. For $4,500, he will manage all the juridical documents without posing awkward inquiries." Stacy appeared to ease slightly, yet she harbored reservations. "And what if Olivia suspects anything?" she questioned, alluding to my 17-year-old granddaughter. "You know she cherishes her grandfather. She has always been quite attached to him." "Olivia is an adolescent," Robert dismissed casually. "What could she achieve, moreover? Once we command the finances, we can dispatch her to pursue education overseas, distant from here, distant from complications." The discussion persisted for another 15 minutes, in which I uncovered appalling specifics about their intentions. They had been orchestrating this scheme for weeks, awaiting the ideal instant. My wellness emergency had presented the flawless chance they sought. Robert disclosed that he bore immense obligations I was ignorant of. He had forfeited a healthcare negligence case the prior year and needed to disburse a compensation of $280,000 to the kin of a patient who perished owing to his oversight. Furthermore, he had ventured into dubious ventures that yielded disastrous deficits. "Without the old man's funds, we are set to forfeit the residence, the vehicle, everything," Robert confessed in anguish. "The Barnes family's counsel will not linger much longer. If we fail to settle the compensation by year's close, they will confiscate all we possess." Stacy affirmed with comprehension. That is why acting promptly is crucial. Once we access his accounts, we can clear all the liabilities and commence anew. When they departed at last, my thoughts whirled. In under a week, I had learned that my son had not merely rejected me, the blood that might have rescued me, but he had also schemed to pilfer all I had toiled for years to establish. Yet there was an element Robert and Stacy ignored, something that would utterly alter this narrative's trajectory and transform the predator into the prey. What Robert and Stacy were utterly oblivious to was that for the preceding 5 months, I had deployed an audio capture setup in various key spots for an entirely distinct purpose. My lower-level neighbor had been pilfering correspondence and parcels from the structure, and as the Residents' Association chair, I required proof to denounce him. I had positioned compact voice-triggered recorders in the foyer, in my home workspace, and oddly in my sleeping quarters too. When I returned home the ensuing Friday after hospital release, the initial action I took was to examine all the captures from the medical center. I possessed a mobile gadget that I perpetually carried in my coat's inner compartment, something I had acquired on my counsel's suggestion after disputes with troublesome renters in my leased holdings. Listening to the captures, I verified every poisonous term my son had voiced, his savage denial to contribute blood, his schemes to deceitfully institutionalize me, and the complete plot to plunder my holdings were documented with pristine clarity. But I required additional data before proceeding. For the following several days, I persisted in simulating frailty and cognitive disarray whenever Robert or Stacy came by. It was essential that they trusted their plot was executing flawlessly. Meanwhile, I covertly reached my reliable private detective, Brian Sullivan, who had assisted me previously in settling disputes with difficult renters and performing history verifications on commercial allies. "Mr. Anderson," Brian stated during our clandestine gathering at a downtown cafe, "I require you to furnish all the particulars you hold on your son's monetary dealings. If he truly bears the obligations you noted, he must have left traces." I supplied him with all the data I had assembled, names of attorneys, estimated timelines of the negligence proceeding, and the snippets of dialogue I had captured. Brian jotted thorough annotations and vowed outcomes in 48 hours. While awaiting Brian's findings, I resolved to probe certain especially alarming facets independently. I phoned my longtime companion, Henry Brooks, who had served as the head of the city's healthcare oversight for 12 years prior to retirement. Henry maintained connections across the whole medical field. "Norman, what you're describing is highly peculiar," Henry remarked after absorbing my account. "Robert always maintained a spotless standing at the facility. Nonetheless, now that you bring it up, there were whispers a couple of months back about a complex incident at the Riverside Hospital, but the specifics were hushed. Henry committed to conducting some subtle probes and ascertaining what precisely had transpired with my son's vocational path. Meanwhile, I sustained my facade as a bewildered and susceptible elder, something that grew tougher to endure daily. On Wednesday morning, Brian contacted me with revelations that surpassed my direst anticipations. We had planned to convene in the park near Central Park, where we could converse without eavesdropping risks. "Mr. Anderson," Brian commenced with a somber demeanor, "your son's predicament is far graver than you envisioned. I have obtained judicial records that reveal Robert was litigated not for a single negligence instance, but for 4 separate cases between February and August of this year." Brian's dossier unveiled a frightening truth. Robert had been executing superfluous operations on senior patients, levying extravagant charges for interventions they did not necessitate. The Barnes family, referenced in their talk, was not the sole impacted. There were at minimum 7 other kin who had lodged civil and penal complaints against my son. "Per my contacts in the courthouse," Brian proceeded, "the aggregate compensations he must remit surpass $450,000. But there is an even worse aspect. The prosecutor's bureau is probing potential accusations of intensified deceit and grave harm. He might confront 7 to 10 years behind bars if all allegations are substantiated. The details were staggering. Yet Brian was not done. He had uncovered that Stacy, far from an unwitting casualty of events, had been a proactive collaborator in her husband's deceptive ploys. As an attorney focused on medical law, she had assisted in crafting misleading agreements and had counseled Robert on evading juridical accountability. Your daughter-in-law operates her own legal practice, but it teeters on insolvency, Brian clarified. She has been redirecting funds from patron accounts to fund Robert's juridical protection expenses. The legal ethics body has already initiated a corrective inquiry against her. But the most startling disclosure was still ahead. Brian had learned that Robert and Stacy had been counterfeiting my signature on numerous papers over the recent several months. They had endeavored to shift ownership of my leased condominium in a fashionable district to a fictitious entity they dominated. Only the fortuitous involvement of their counsel, Mr. Anthony Rossi, halted the shift from finalizing. Brian elaborated. Mr. Rossi grew wary when he observed that the signature did not precisely align with the specimens he held on record, and opted to defer until he could confer with you directly. Now I comprehended why Robert and Stacy were so frantic to establish my cognitive inadequacy. It was not merely to tap my funds, but to validate all the falsifications they had already perpetrated. If they succeeded in deeming me unfit, they could contend that any discrepancies in the papers stemmed from my waning cognitive condition. That evening, solitary in my dwelling, I scrutinized all the data I had amassed. I held recordings of their plotting exchanges, proof of their colossal liabilities, verification of paper falsification, and accounts from various casualties of Robert's deceptive ploys. It was time to transition from safeguard to assault. With all the proof I had compiled, it was time to confer with experts who could aid me in employing this data lawfully and efficiently. On Saturday morning, I sought an immediate consultation with my dependable attorney, Thomas Wright, who had managed all my juridical matters for the past 18 years. Norman, Thomas remarked after scrupulously examining all the papers I submitted. This is far more severe than I first presumed. We are not merely addressing a bid at familial deceit, but a structured illicit syndicate impacting numerous casualties. Thomas clarified that the signature forgeries comprised document deceit, that the plots to label me unfit signified attempted intensified deceit, and that Robert's deceptive medical ploys could be categorized as offenses against communal wellness. Each of these indictments bore substantial incarceration terms. Nevertheless, Thomas went on, we must advance with utmost prudence. Your son and daughter-in-law are experts with powerful links in the juridical and healthcare frameworks. We require a tactic that is utterly unassailable. During our 2-hour session, we formulated a precise scheme that would strike on several fronts concurrently. First, we would lodge a formal grievance with the prosecutor's bureau for the document deceit offenses. Second, we would dispatch all the proof of medical deceit to the healthcare oversight and the state's wellness agency. Third, we would initiate a civil action to reclaim any funds they had succeeded in fraudulently extracting. But there is something more vital than all this. Thomas cautioned me. We need to safeguard all your monetary holdings promptly. If Robert and Stacy sense you are probing them, they might attempt to expedite their schemes or even obliterate proof. That same evening, escorted by Thomas, I visited all my financial institutions to enact extra safety protocols. I altered all my access codes. I stipulated that any dealing exceeding $2,000 necessitated my in-person attendance with 3 identification forms. And I demanded instant alerts for any efforts by outsiders to access my accounts, at the Central City branch where I maintained my chief account. The supervisor, Mrs. Patricia Hayes, notified me of something that chilled me. "Mr. Anderson," Patricia stated with evident worry. "3 weeks prior, your son visited us, accompanied by an attorney. They submitted health papers that allegedly verified you were enduring acute mental deterioration and sought entry to your financial records." "And what action did you take?" I inquired, restraining my fury. "Thankfully, our guidelines mandate that such petitions be handled solely by the headquarters juridical division, which requires at least 20 working days," Patricia answered. "Furthermore, I insisted on conferring with you directly before advancing any modifications to your account. But your son maintained it was unfeasible due to your cognitive condition." Thomas recorded comprehensive notes of this data and solicited duplicates of all the papers Robert had tendered. When we inspected them, we unearthed something remarkable. The health attestations were counterfeit, but not by Robert outright, but by his associate, Dr. Theodore Ramirez, who had evidently been compensated to fabricate deceptive health papers. "This substantially expands the conspiracy's reach," Thomas noted. "Now we possess proof that other healthcare experts are implicated in falsifying formal papers." Over the ensuing several days, while I continued to simulate cognitive disarray before my relatives, I labored intensely with my juridical group to fortify our argument. Brian, my detective, had succeeded in discreetly contacting some of the casualties of Robert's medical deceit, and their accounts were ruinous. One of the casualties, Mrs. Eleanor Barnes, a 72-year-old lady, narrated her ordeal via a virtual meeting that Thomas organized in his workspace. "Dr. Anderson persuaded me that I required immediate cardiac surgery," Mrs. Barnes explained with a quivering tone. "He claimed that without the procedure, I would perish in under 4 months. I disbursed $50,000 for an intervention that, as we subsequently learned, was utterly needless. My heart was entirely sound." Mrs. Barnes's situation was especially grave because Robert had distorted her cardiac examination outcomes to warrant the superfluous surgery. He had modified electrocardiograms, altered echocardiograms, and had compensated lab workers to supply falsified blood evaluations. "But the worst aspect," Mrs. Barnes proceeded, "is that during the needless procedure, Dr. Anderson injured an artery that was entirely sound. Now I possess genuine cardiac issues that I lacked before encountering him. My kin is economically devastated, and my wellness is ruined due to his avarice." When the virtual session concluded, I remained mute for numerous minutes. I could not fathom that the offspring I had nurtured with such affection and commitment was capable of inflicting such anguish on blameless individuals. But the most troubling insight was that I had unwittingly financed his complete medical training and had contributed to forging this fiend. Thomas drew me from my reverie with a suggestion that would utterly shift our tactics' direction. "Norman," he declared resolutely, "I believe the moment has arrived to lay a snare for your son and daughter-in-law. We hold sufficient proof to advance juridically, but if we can induce them to further implicate themselves, we can ensure much sterner penalties and hinder them from maneuvering the juridical system with their links." The snare that Thomas suggested was ingenious in its straightforwardness and catastrophic in its possible ramifications. Thomas's scheme was as clever as it was perilous. The concept was to arrange a family assembly where I would feign total mental disorientation, generating the ideal chance for Robert and Stacy to unveil all their schemes before concealed observers and expert recording apparatus. "We are going to mimic that you desire to enact pressing alterations to your testament," Thomas elaborated during our preparation. "We will inform them that you are muddled about your holdings and wish to allocate everything prior to your demise. This will compel them to display their authentic character and further commit with damning declarations. To implement this tactic, we needed the cooperation of our reliable attorney, Mr. Rossi, who had already proven his honesty by thwarting the prior deceptive transfers. He consented to join after grasping all the conspiracy's particulars against me. Norman, Mr. Rossi guaranteed me. As an attorney, I have witnessed numerous instances of mistreatment against seniors, but never something so intricate and merciless as this. It will be a privilege to assist you in exposing these offenders. The next Tuesday, I phoned Robert from my fixed line, ensuring to sound bewildered and defenseless. "My son," I uttered with a contrived, shaky tone. "I must see you without delay. I am deeply concerned about my possessions, about the funds, about all. I think I am going to pass soon, and I do not know what to do with my holdings." Robert answered with a phony solicitude that I found repulsive after knowing his genuine aims. "Dad, relax," he stated in a patronizing manner. "Stacy and I will visit tomorrow evening to discuss with you. Do not concern yourself with anything. We will manage everything." "But I do not recall where I store the vital papers." I persisted in my pretense. "Sometimes I overlook things. Son, do you believe something grave is occurring to my intellect?" "It is typical at your age, Dad," Robert responded, and I could sense a hint of gratification in his tone. "That is why it is essential that you resolve all your matters while you still can. Do not worry. We will organize it all tomorrow." That evening, Thomas and his crew discreetly set up audio and visual recording gear in my primary sitting area. They employed minuscule cameras concealed in photo frames, ornamental foliage, even in the wall timepiece I had received from my father. The microphones were so diminutive they were entirely unseen, but seized dialogues with expert quality. "Recall, Norman," Thomas directed me. "You must seem bewildered, but not wholly incoherent. We want them to trust you can render choices about your testament, but that you are impaired enough to be readily influenced." On Wednesday at 5:00 in the evening, Robert and Stacy arrived precisely at my residence. I welcomed them in my sleepwear and gown, with my hair tousled, acting as if I struggled to identify them initially. "Robert, is that you, son?" I queried, simulating bewilderment. "Oh, yes. And you are, what is your name?" "Oh, Stacy." "Naturally. Pardon me, sometimes I forget things." Stacy swapped a meaningful glance with Robert. It was evident they viewed my conduct as affirmation that my cognitive decline had progressed significantly since our prior interaction. "Dad," Robert stated, seating himself beside me on the settee, "you mentioned you wished to discuss your holdings and your funds. What precisely is troubling you?" "I simply do not know where the papers are," I answered, acting agitated. "I have considerable money in the bank." "Correct. And I have homes, too. But I do not remember how many or where they are. I fear that when I pass, everything will vanish." Stacy bent forward with a seemingly empathetic look, but I could discern the covetousness gleaming in her eyes. "Mr. Anderson," she said in a saccharine tone, "do not worry about that. Robert and I can assist you in arranging everything. Why do not you tell us what properties you recollect possessing?" For the next 45 minutes, I pretended to be muddled about my assets while they attempted to extract precise information from me. I deliberately cited incorrect amounts, erroneous dates, and vague locations for my holdings. Every error I committed seemed to reassure them more, convincing them that I was truly losing my mental faculties. "Dad," Robert eventually said, "I think it would be wise for you to endorse some documents to ensure everything is orderly. Stacy can prepare the necessary papers, so you do not have to concern yourself with these matters anymore." "What kind of documents?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Well," Stacy replied cautiously, "we could draft a general power of attorney so Robert can oversee your bank accounts and settle your bills. It would also be prudent to transfer the properties to his name to avoid issues with the tax authorities when the time comes." "You mean when I die?" I asked bluntly. "Exactly," Robert affirmed without displaying any feeling. It is the wisest action you can take now while you are still somewhat clear-headed. What they uttered next surpassed all my anticipations. Believing I was utterly vulnerable and manipulable, they began to disclose specific details of their plans that I had never heard before. "Look, Dad," Robert said with chilling brutality. "The truth is, Stacy and I have been preparing all of this for weeks. We knew that sooner or later your mind would begin to fail, and we needed to be prepared." "Robert is correct," Stacy added. "We have consulted with several experts, and they all agree that the best thing for you is for someone younger and more capable to handle your financial affairs." "But I can still think," I protested feebly. "I am not insane." Robert chuckled with a coldness that froze my blood. "Dad, last week you asked me the same question 4 times in 10 minutes. Yesterday you called Stacy by my mother's name, and she passed 20 years ago. And right now you do not remember where you keep your important documents. Do you really think you are fit to manage $750? 0, 0, 0. The conversation continued for another 25 minutes, and with every word they spoke, Robert and Stacy dug deeper into their own deceptions and revealed the true extent of their conspiracy. What shocked me the most was discovering that they had even involved my granddaughter Olivia in their manipulative plans. "And what are we going to do about Olivia?" Stacy asked, glancing toward the door as if fearing the teenager might appear at any moment. "Olivia will not be a problem," Robert replied with total indifference. "We will tell her that her grandfather is ill and needs special care. Once we have legal control of everything, we will send her to study in Paris with my sister, Karen, far from here, far from uncomfortable questions." "But will she not suspect something when she sees that her grandfather no longer lives in his apartment?" Stacy insisted. "By the time she realizes, it will be too late," Robert replied, shrugging. "Besides, Olivia is a kid. What can she do against 2 adults with advanced degrees and legal contacts?" Hearing how they planned to manipulate and send away my granddaughter, the only person in the family who truly loved me, was the moment I decided I had heard enough. It was time to reveal my winning hand. I rose slowly, pretending to need the sofa's arm for support, and walked to my desk, where I kept some important documents. Robert and Stacy watched me attentively, probably expecting another episode of confusion. "Son," I said, turning to them, "there is something I need to show you before I sign any documents." "What is it, Dad?" Robert asked with poorly disguised impatience, instead of answering immediately. I took out my cell phone and dialed a number I had memorized. The call connected on the first ring. "Thomas," I said clearly into the phone, "you can come up with Mr. Rossi now. We have everything we need." The expression on Robert and Stacy's faces changed instantly from condescending confidence to total confusion and then to gradual horror as they began to understand what was happening. "Dad," Robert stammered, "what are you talking about? Who is Thomas?" Instead of answering, I went to the window and opened the curtains that had been closed during our entire conversation. The evening light flooded the living room, revealing for the first time the tiny cameras that had been recording every second of our meeting. "See that camera behind your grandmother's portrait?" "Robert," I said, pointing to the wall. "And that other one in the corner plant, and the microphone hidden in the clock I inherited from my father." Stacy jumped up from the sofa, her face completely pale. "What does this mean, Norman?" she asked with a trembling voice. "It means, dear Stacy," I replied with a calm that surprised even myself, "that for the last 75 minutes, you have confessed on professional cameras to all the crimes you have committed against me and plan to commit in the future." At that moment, footsteps were heard in the hallway, and the front door opened. Thomas entered, accompanied by Mr. Rossi. my lawyer's associate, and two other people Robert and Stacy did not immediately recognize. "Good afternoon," Thomas said, addressing my son and daughter-in-law. "I am Thomas Wright, Norman's attorney, and these are Inspector Michael Jenkins of the Police Department and Prosecutor Laura Simmons." The silence that followed this introduction was deafening. Robert and Stacy stood completely still, like statues of salt, as they processed the magnitude of the trap they had fallen into. "Inspector," Robert finally mumbled. "Prosecutor, I do not understand what is happening here." Inspector Jenkins approached them, showing his official identification: Dr. Robert Anderson and Mrs. Stacy Anderson. You are under investigation for multiple crimes, including document forgery, attempted aggravated fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and in Dr. Anderson's case, also for medical malpractice and serious injury against multiple patients. "This is ridiculous," Stacy shouted, partially regaining her composure. "We have not done anything illegal. We were simply trying to help an old man who is clearly losing his mind." "Really?" Prosecutor Simmons intervened with a cold smile. "Then can you explain why you attempted to forge Mr. Anderson's signature on property transfer documents? And why Dr. Anderson submitted falsified medical certificates to 4 different banks claiming his father suffered from senile dementia, when that is clearly not the case?" Robert finally found his voice, but the words that came out of his mouth only worsened his situation. "How can you accuse me of forging medical certificates?" he protested. "I am a cardiovascular surgeon with 25 years of experience. I, better than anyone, can assess the mental state of my own father. That is precisely why your actions are so serious," the prosecutor replied. "A doctor who uses his professional position to commit fraud against his own family and innocent patients deserves the most severe penalties our laws provide." Thomas came over to me and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Norman," he said, "are you ready to tell these authorities everything you have discovered about the criminal activities of your son and daughter-in-law?" I looked directly into the eyes of Robert, the son I had raised with so much love and dedication, the man who had denied me his blood when I was dying, and who had planned to steal everything I had worked for decades to build. "Inspector," I said with a firm, clear voice, "I have a lot to tell you." For the next hour and a half, my living room turned into a makeshift interrogation room, where I meticulously revealed all the information I had gathered over weeks of investigation. Inspector Jenkins took detailed statements, while Prosecutor Simmons reviewed every document, every recording, and every piece of evidence we had prepared. "I will start at the beginning," I told the authorities, as Robert and Stacy sat in complete silence. "On September 15th, my son denied me a blood transfusion that could have saved my life, telling me verbatim, 'I would rather die than save a failure like you.' All of this was recorded on my personal device." Thomas played the recording from the hospital on the audio equipment we had set up, hearing those cruel words again, but this time in front of judicial authorities, gave me a satisfaction I had not felt in months. "But that was just the beginning," I continued. "I later discovered that my son and daughter-in-law had been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, to steal my entire estate, and pay off the enormous debts Robert had accumulated from medical malpractice lawsuits." Prosecutor Simmons interrupted my story to address Robert directly. "Dr. Anderson," she said in a stern tone, "our preliminary investigations have confirmed that you are facing at least 7 civil lawsuits for a total of $480,000 in settlements. Is this correct?" Robert exchanged a desperate look with Stacy before answering. "Prosecutor, those lawsuits are completely baseless," he lied shamelessly. "They are disgruntled patients looking for easy money by suing successful doctors. My professional insurance will take care of everything." "Your professional insurance?" The prosecutor replied with a sardonic smile. According to our records, your insurance policy was canceled 7 months ago for non-payment of premiums. Furthermore, we have testimonies from at least 5 victims confirming that you performed completely unnecessary medical procedures on them. Inspector Jenkins took a bulky folder from his briefcase and began reading specific names and dates. Eleanor Barnes, unnecessary heart surgery, $50,000. Samuel Rivera, fraudulent spine operation, $42,000. Patricia Gomez, removal of a healthy gallbladder, $25,000. Shall I continue, Dr. Anderson? With each name the inspector mentioned, Robert grew paler. It was obvious he did not expect the authorities to have such detailed information about his victims. But there is more. I continued. During my recovery in the hospital, I overheard a conversation between Robert and Stacy where they planned to fraudulently commit me to a nursing home and forge medical documents to declare me incompetent. Thomas then played the recordings I had obtained at the hospital, where Robert and Stacy's voices could be clearly heard discussing their criminal plans. The audio quality was perfect, and every word was unmistakable. When the playback finished, Stacy finally lost the composure she had maintained until then. "This is an elaborate trap," she screamed, jumping to her feet. "A vengeful old man is making up false accusations against his own family. Norman never had cameras in his house. This is all a farce." Prosecutor Simmons looked at her with an expression that could have frozen lava. "Mrs. Anderson," she said in an icy voice, "are you suggesting that Mr. Anderson forged the recordings where you confessed to multiple crimes? Are you implying he hired actors to imitate your voices with perfect precision? Or perhaps you think he bribed multiple victims of your husband's medical fraud to lie to the authorities?" Inspector Jenkins then approached Stacy and showed her another set of documents. "Furthermore, Mrs. Anderson, we have evidence that you, as a lawyer, actively participated in the forgery of medical certificates and the attempted fraudulent transfer of properties. The State Bar Association has already opened a disciplinary file against you." "What medical certificates?" Stacy asked, trying to sound innocent, but her trembling voice betrayed her completely. "The certificates signed by Dr. Theodore Ramirez stating that Mr. Anderson suffered from severe senile dementia," the inspector replied. "Certificates that you presented at 4 different banking institutions trying to gain access to your father-in-law's accounts." Thomas then intervened with information that was the final blow for Stacy. "Inspector," my lawyer said, "we have also discovered that Mrs. Anderson diverted money from her own client's trust accounts to pay for her husband's legal defense. This constitutes aggravated embezzlement." The color drained completely from Stacy's face. It was clear she did not know we had discovered that information as well. Robert, seeing that the situation was completely hopeless, tried one last desperate strategy. "Dad," he said in a pleading voice, "this is all a terrible misunderstanding. Yes, it is true. I have financial problems, but I never really wanted to hurt you. I was just desperate. If you drop all the charges, I promise to pay back every dollar I tried to take." His pathetic plea filled me with a mixture of pity and disgust. This was the same man who had denied me his blood when I was dying, who had planned to steal everything I owned, and who had caused unspeakable suffering to innocent patients. "Robert," I replied with a calm that surprised me, "when you denied me your blood in the hospital, you forever destroyed any possibility of reconciliation between us. A father can forgive many things, but he can never forget when his own son would rather see him die than help him." Prosecutor Simmons then addressed them both in an official tone. "Dr. Robert Anderson and Mrs. Stacy Anderson, you are formally charged with conspiracy to commit aggravated fraud, forgery of official documents, and in Dr. Anderson's case, also with medical malpractice resulting in serious injury. You have the right to remain silent and to contact a defense attorney. Inspector Jenkins approached them with handcuffs ready. Furthermore, he added, you are being detained until the bail hearing, which will take place next Tuesday. As I watched my son and daughter-in-law being handcuffed, I felt a strange mixture of justice served and profound sadness. I had won this battle, but I had lost my family forever. After the authorities took Robert and Stacy away in handcuffs, a strange and heavy silence fell over my apartment. Thomas, Mr. Rossi, and I were left alone, surrounded by the recording equipment that had captured the most devastating confession I had ever witnessed. Norman, Thomas said, putting the documents in his briefcase. The hardest part is over. Now, we must prepare for the legal consequences that will come in the following days and weeks. Over the next 4 days, the media picked up the story of the arrest of a prestigious cardiovascular surgeon and his lawyer wife for family fraud and medical malpractice. The newspaper headlines were devastating. Doctor denies transfusion to dying father. Surgeon scams elderly patients with unnecessary operations. Lawyer steals client money to defend criminal husband. On Monday morning, I received a call that completely surprised me. It was my granddaughter Olivia, who had been spending the weekend at her best friend's house when her parents were arrested. Grandpa, she said with a trembling voice, I just found out about everything from the news. Is what they are saying about Mom and Dad true? The conversation with Olivia was one of the most difficult of my life. How do you explain to a 17-year-old girl that her parents were criminals who had tried to rob their own grandfather? How do you tell her that her father had denied me a blood transfusion that could have saved my life? Olivia, honey, I said, choosing my words carefully. Your father and mother made very serious mistakes, but I want you to know that none of this is your fault and that I will always love you no matter what. Can I come see you, Grandpa? She asked with a broken voice. I do not have anyone else now. Of course, my love, I replied immediately. This will always be your home. When Olivia arrived that afternoon, she had a small suitcase and eyes swollen from crying. I hugged her for several minutes without saying anything, feeling her small body tremble against mine. Grandpa, she finally whispered, why did Dad do those terrible things to you? I always thought he loved you. That question forced me to reflect deeply on the mistakes I might have made as a father. I had spoiled Robert, giving him everything without teaching him the value of hard work and sacrifice. I had been too lenient when he showed the first signs of selfishness and lack of empathy. Olivia, I finally said, sometimes people change in ways we cannot understand or predict. Your father was overcome by greed and lost sight of what really matters in life. During that week, as Robert and Stacy remained in custody awaiting their court hearing, the first consequences of their actions began to unfold. The Riverside Hospital immediately suspended Robert's medical license and launched an internal investigation into all the surgical procedures he had performed over the last 3 years. On Wednesday, Dr. Edward Foster, the hospital's medical director, called me personally to apologize for not detecting the irregularities in my son's professional behavior sooner. Mr. Anderson, Dr. Foster said, I want to express our sincerest apologies. As a medical institution, we failed by not supervising Dr. Robert Anderson's activities more strictly. We are reviewing all of his cases and contacting every patient who may have been affected. That same week, the city's medical board officially announced Robert's expulsion from the professional organization, meaning he could never again practice medicine in the country. The decision was unanimous and was based not only on the fraud against patients, but also on the violation of the Hippocratic Oath by denying medical assistance to his own father. In parallel, the Bar Association immediately suspended Stacy's professional license and froze all her law firm's accounts after confirming she had diverted client funds for personal use. On Thursday of that week, Thomas informed me about the first judicial decisions related to the case. "Norman," he said during our meeting in his office, "the prosecutor has decided to seek prison sentences of 7 to 9 years for Robert for the crimes of aggravated fraud, document forgery, and medical malpractice. For Stacy, she is asking for 5 to 7 years for complicity in fraud and embezzlement." "And what are their chances of avoiding prison?" I asked. "Very slim," Thomas replied categorically. "The evidence is overwhelming. They have multiple victims willing to testify, and the crimes are perfectly documented on audio and video recordings. Besides, the case has received a lot of media attention, which makes it unlikely that the judges will be lenient." During those days, I also received calls from some of the victims of Robert's medical frauds. Mrs. Eleanor Barnes, the elderly woman who had undergone unnecessary heart surgery, contacted me to thank me for reporting my son. "Mr. Anderson," she said with an emotional voice, "I know how difficult it must have been for you to report your own son, but thanks to your courage, my family and I will finally get justice. Your son stole my life savings and nearly killed me with an operation I did not need." These conversations with Robert's victims helped me confirm that I had made the right decision, no matter how personally painful it was. On Tuesday evening, while I was having a quiet dinner with Olivia in my apartment, the phone rang. It was a call from the prison. Robert had earned his right to a phone call and had decided to contact me. "Dad," I heard his broken voice through the receiver. "Please, I need to talk to you. Please." Olivia looked at me with questioning eyes, waiting to see my reaction. After several seconds of silence, I made the decision that would definitively mark the future of our relationship. "Robert," I said in a firm but calm voice, "you have 6 minutes to say what you have to say." "Dad," Robert began with a voice I had never heard before, broken by sobs and desperation. "I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I never wanted things to go this far. Everything got out of control." Olivia came closer to me, and I could see tears streaming down her cheeks as she listened to her father plead from prison. I gestured for her to sit next to me because this conversation would affect her directly too. "Robert," I replied, maintaining a neutral tone, "you had multiple opportunities to tell me the truth about your financial problems. You could have come to me as a son should to his father when he needs help. Instead, you chose to lie, to steal, and when I needed you most, you denied me something as basic as a blood transfusion." "I know, Dad. I know." Robert sobbed. "I was desperate. The lawsuits, the debts, the pressure. Stacy convinced me it was the only way to save our future. But I never really meant to hurt you." "You never meant to hurt me," I repeated with a bitterness I could not contain. "Robert, you literally told me you would rather see me die than save my life. How can you now say you did not want to hurt me?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds. When Robert spoke again, his voice sounded even more desperate. "Dad, I was out of my mind. The pressure, the problems, everything. I said things I did not really mean. Please, you have to believe me. I am your son. I am your flesh and blood." "That is precisely why it hurts so much," I replied. "Because you are my son. Because I gave you everything I had. Because I believed in you when no one else did. And you chose to betray me in the cruelest way possible." Olivia took my hand and whispered, "Grandpa, maybe Dad really is sorry." Robert must have heard his daughter's comment because he immediately addressed her. "Olivia, are you there, sweetheart?" he asked with renewed hope in his voice. Olivia, Tell your grandfather this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. Tell him your dad is not the monster they think he is. Robert, I interrupted him firmly. Do not involve Olivia in this conversation. She has nothing to do with the decisions you made as an adult. But Dad, Robert insisted, Olivia is my daughter. She has a right to know that her father made mistakes, but that he is not a criminal like the media is portraying me. You are not a criminal, I asked in disbelief. Robert, you performed unnecessary operations on elderly patients, stole their life savings, forged medical documents, tried to steal my estate, and you denied me a transfusion that could have saved my life. If that does not make you a criminal, then I do not know what does. The conversation was interrupted by a background voice telling Robert his call time was ending. Dad, please, he shouted desperately. I cannot go to prison. I will not survive there. Stacy is already talking to her lawyer about a possible deal with the prosecutor's office. If you drop the charges, maybe we can work something out. Work something out, I repeated bitterly. Robert, do you really think that after everything you have done, after all the lives you have ruined, you can just work things out? I can pay back the money, he exclaimed. I can compensate all the patients. I can do community service, whatever it takes. With what money are you going to compensate anyone? I asked him. According to my investigations, you owe over $450,000 in settlements. Your accounts are frozen. Your medical license has been permanently revoked. And your wife has also lost her professional license. Where exactly do you plan on getting money to compensate anyone? The silence that followed my question was revealing. It was clear Robert had not really thought about the practical consequences of his actions. Dad, he finally whispered, if you do not help me, I am going to lose everything. My career, my freedom, my family, everything I have worked for 35 years is going to be destroyed. Robert, I replied with a calm that surprised me. You already lost all of that the moment you decided to put your greed before your honor. I did not destroy your career. You destroyed it by performing unnecessary operations on innocent patients. I did not ruin your marriage. You ruined it by involving Stacy in your criminal schemes. And I definitely did not end our father-son relationship. You ended it when you denied me your blood, as I bled out on a hospital stretcher. The background voice interrupted again, indicating the call had to end immediately. Dad, please. Robert cried out one last time. Do not abandon me. I am your only son. Robert, I said with a finality that surprised even Olivia. I had a son named Robert Anderson. He was a doctor married to a lawyer and had a beautiful daughter named Olivia. But that son died for me the day he looked me in the eye and told me he would rather see me die than help me. The man speaking to me from prison is a stranger who shares his name and face, but he is not my son. I hung up the phone before he could reply. Olivia looked at me with a mixture of awe and sadness. Grandpa, she said softly, are you really not going to help Dad? My love, I replied, taking her hands in mine. Helping your father now would be the worst possible thing for him. If I let him avoid the consequences of his actions, he will never truly learn what he has done wrong. And more importantly, his victims will never get the justice they deserve. That night, while Olivia slept in the guest room I had specially prepared for her, I received another unexpected call. This time, it was from Stacy, who had apparently also earned her call from the women's prison where she was being held. Mr. Anderson. I heard Stacy's voice through the receiver, noticeably different from her usual tone of professional confidence. Now it sounded broken, desperate, completely defeated. I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything that has happened, but I need to talk to you about Olivia. I was surprised that Stacy chose to start the conversation by talking about her daughter instead of pleading for her own freedom, as Robert had. "What about Olivia?" I asked, maintaining a cautious tone. "She has no one else but you now," Stacy continued, and I could detect genuine tears in her voice. "My sister in Texas cannot take care of a teenager, and Robert's parents died years ago. Please do not let Olivia pay for our mistakes." "Stacy," I replied firmly, "Olivia will always have a home with me. She is my granddaughter, and I love her unconditionally. But I cannot say the same about you or Robert." "I know," Stacy murmured, "Mr. Anderson. I want you to know that this all started as a desperate idea when Robert's financial problems became unbearable. I never imagined we would go this far, that we would do so much harm." "A desperate idea," I repeated in disbelief. "Stacy, you two planned for weeks to steal my estate. You forged medical documents, lied to financial institutions, and even involved corrupt doctors in your conspiracy. That is not desperation. It is an organized criminal enterprise." The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds before Stacy spoke again, this time with a brutal honesty that caught me completely off guard. "You are right," she admitted, "Mr. Anderson. During these days in prison, I have had time to reflect on everything we did, and I have realized something terrible. At some point, I stopped being a lawyer and became an accomplice to a con man. I helped Robert steal from innocent patients. I stole money from my own clients, and we conspired to steal everything you had worked for decades to build from you." Her confession left me momentarily speechless. It was the first time either of them had fully admitted the magnitude of their crimes without excuses or justifications. "Why are you telling me this now, Stacy?" I finally asked. "Because I want you to know that I completely understand why you reported us," she replied. "And because I need you to know that whatever happens to me, Olivia had absolutely nothing to do with any of our crimes. She did not even suspect we were having financial problems." Over the next few minutes, Stacy revealed additional details about the extent of their criminal activities that even my investigations had not uncovered. She told me about other doctors who had been involved in the unnecessary surgery scheme, about additional patients who had been scammed, and about the network of corrupt lawyers who had facilitated the document forgeries. "So, Mr. Anderson," Stacy continued, "my defense attorney has explained that I will face between 5 and 7 years of effective prison time. There is no way to avoid it with all the evidence you gathered. But I want to ask you a favor that has nothing to do with me or Robert." "What favor?" I asked, curious. "Please do not let Olivia visit me in prison for the first few years of my sentence," she said with a determination I did not expect. "A teenager should not see her mother in that environment. I want her to remember the successful lawyer I was before, not the criminal I became." This request impacted me deeply. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Stacy was showing genuine maternal concern above her own interests. "Are you sure about that, Stacy?" I asked. "Olivia might need to talk to you, especially during the first few months as she adjusts to this new reality." "I am completely sure," she replied with conviction, "Mr. Anderson. Olivia is a brilliant young woman with a promising future. You cannot let her parents' mistakes define the rest of her life. She needs stability, education, and above all, she needs the example of honorable people like you." The conversation was interrupted by the notice that the call time was ending, but Stacy had something more to say. "Mr. Anderson," she said quickly, "there is something else you should know. Robert is considering pleading guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. His lawyer told him that with a full confession and cooperation with the authorities, he could get out in 4 or 5 years instead of 9. "And what are you going to do?" I asked. I am going to follow my lawyer's advice and also plead guilty, she replied. There is no point in prolonging this process with a long trial that would only cause more pain to Olivia and more suffering to the victims of our crimes. After hanging up, I sat in silence for several minutes, reflecting on the two conversations I had had that night. Robert had called, seeking pity and trying to avoid the consequences of his actions. Stacy had called to take full responsibility and to protect the well-being of her daughter. The next day, Thomas visited me with news about the latest legal developments. "Mr. Anderson," he informed me, "both Robert and Stacy have decided to plead guilty to all charges. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from now." "What does this mean in practical terms?" I asked. "It means Robert will likely receive a sentence of 5 years of effective prison time, and Stacy will receive 4 years. Thomas explained. "Additionally, both will have to pay full restitution to all their victims, which will leave them completely bankrupt for the rest of their lives." That same week, the medical board issued an official statement permanently expelling Robert from the medical profession and recommending that his case be studied in medical schools as an example of an extreme violation of medical ethics. On Saturday afternoon, as I was helping Olivia with her homework, I reflected on how a family that seemed perfect from the outside had completely collapsed in a matter of weeks. But I also realized that in a way, I had gained something invaluable, a closer, more honest relationship with my granddaughter, and the confirmation that I had instilled the right values, even if my son had chosen to abandon them. "Grandpa," Olivia said as she closed her books, "do you think I will ever be able to forgive my parents for everything they did?" "My love," I replied, hugging her, "forgiveness is not something you should feel obligated to give. It is something that will come naturally when you are ready, if you ever are. In the meantime, let us focus on building your future. 4 years have passed since that terrible day in the hospital when my son denied me the transfusion that could have saved my life. As I write these words at my desk, looking out at the autumn cityscape through my window, I can say that the most painful decision of my life also turned out to be the most correct one. Robert served exactly 5 years in the state prison. He got out last April, a completely different person, gaunt, prematurely aged, and stripped of all the arrogance that had characterized his personality for decades. Prison had broken not only his body, but also the inflated ego that had led him to commit so many crimes. During his time in prison, I never visited him. I kept my word to consider him a stranger who simply shared my late son's last name. However, through Thomas, my lawyer, I stayed informed about his situation. Robert worked in the prison library, completed several rehabilitation programs, and according to the prison reports, showed genuine remorse for his actions. Stacy was released from prison 8 months before Robert, after serving 3.5 years of her sentence. Unlike her husband, she kept the promise she had made to me during that phone call from jail. She never tried to contact Olivia during her incarceration, thus protecting her daughter from the trauma of seeing her in that degrading environment. When Robert regained his freedom, he tried to rebuild his life from scratch in the humblest way possible, with no medical license, no assets, and a criminal record that will follow him forever. He got a job as a clerk in a pharmacy in a working-class neighborhood. The owner, an elderly man who knew his story, decided to give him a chance after Robert honestly confessed the whole truth about his past. "Norman," Thomas told me during one of our regular meetings, "your son is living in a studio apartment near his job, earning minimum wage, walking to work to save on public transport. And according to my sources, he has not tried to contact any of his former medical colleagues." Robert's transformation was complete, from a prestigious cardiovascular surgeon to a pharmacy clerk, from living in a mansion in a gated community to inhabiting a tiny studio in one of the city's humblest neighborhoods, from handling hundreds of thousands of dollars to surviving on less than $1.200 a month. Stacy followed a similar, though slightly different path. She permanently lost her license to practice law, but got a job as an administrative assistant at a veterinary clinic. She lives alone in a rented apartment in a suburb, and from what information I have been able to gather, maintains an extremely low profile, avoiding any contact with her former professional circles. What has surprised me most is that Robert and Stacy divorced during their time in prison. Apparently, the pressure of facing the consequences of their crimes completely destroyed their marriage. They now live separate lives, united only by the pain of having lost custody of their daughter and the regret for the decisions they made. Olivia, now 21, has grown into an extraordinary young woman. She graduated high school with excellent grades and is currently studying medicine at the same university where her father graduated decades ago. But unlike Robert, Olivia has chosen to specialize in community medicine, with the goal of working in underserved areas to help people who cannot afford private health care. Grandpa, she told me a few weeks ago during one of our weekly family dinners, I want to be the kind of doctor my father should have been, but never was. I want to dedicate my career to healing, not to getting rich. The irony of the situation is not lost on me. The son who betrayed me in the cruelest way possible has indirectly given me the most wonderful granddaughter I could have hoped for. Olivia has inherited her father's intelligence, but she has also developed the compassion and integrity that he lost somewhere along the way. Over these 4 years, I have kept in regular contact with several of the victims of Robert's medical frauds. Mrs. Eleanor Barnes, the elderly woman who was subjected to the unnecessary heart surgery, fully recovered from the complications caused by the fraudulent operation. With part of the money she recovered through the settlements, she established a small foundation that helps seniors identify and report medical scams. Mr. Anderson, Mrs. Barnes told me during our last phone call, what your son did to me was terrible, but your courage in reporting him saved many other people from suffering the same fate. For that, I will always be grateful. The Riverside Hospital implemented new medical supervision protocols as a direct result of the scandal caused by Robert. Now all non-urgent surgical procedures require a mandatory second opinion, and there is a monitoring system that tracks doctors' behavioral patterns to detect possible irregularities. As for my health, I have fully recovered from the hemorrhage that almost cost me my life 4 years ago. Ironically, the emotional stress of discovering my son's betrayal and the process of bringing him to justice gave me a new energy and purpose in life. At 69, I feel more vital and mentally sharp than I have in years. I have decided to use my experience to help other seniors who might be victims of family or financial abuse. I volunteer with an organization that specializes in detecting and preventing these types of crimes, sharing my story as an example that it is possible to fight back and get justice regardless of age or circumstances. 3 months ago, Robert finally tried to contact me through a letter he sent via Thomas. In it, he asked for forgiveness once again and expressed his desire to be a part of my life again, even in a very limited way. The letter was handwritten with a shaky script that reflected his emotional state, and each paragraph conveyed a remorse that seemed genuine. After reading the letter several times and discussing it with Olivia, I decided to reply. I wrote him a short letter explaining that while I could understand his remorse, the wounds he had caused were too deep to ever fully heal. I wished him good luck in his new life, but made it clear that our father-son relationship had definitively ended the day he denied me his blood in the hospital. The person who wrote this letter may be a good man now. I explained to Olivia after sending my response, but he is no longer my son. My son died the day he decided his selfishness was more important than his father's life. As I finish writing this story, I reflect on the lessons I have learned during these extraordinary years. I have discovered that justice, though painful to obtain, is essential for healing the deepest wounds. I have learned that age is not a barrier to defending oneself from those who try to take advantage of us. And more importantly, I have confirmed that genuine family ties are based on love and mutual respect, not simply on shared blood. My granddaughter Olivia represents the very best of what a family can be: unconditional love, mutual support, and shared values that transcend difficulties. She is my true heir, not only to my material estate, but to the principles and dignity I have tried to uphold throughout my life. The story of my son Robert serves as a warning to all who believe they can betray family trust without consequences. But it is also a story of hope because it shows that it is never too late to stand up for what is right, no matter how painful the process may be. If you enjoyed this story, support us with a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your opinions in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box that appears on the left. Thanks for joining us.